All right, today's a special one. We are joined by none other than Professor Bart K, the man who I believe to be the world's leading nutrition expert. So today we're going to debunk all the main carnivore myths.
Saturated fat does not cause heart disease. There is no causal relationship between heart disease and the intake of either saturated fat or cholesterol. What it turns out is that fiber is an irritant in the human colon. Our colons are not evolved for fiber. Look, I've been on a carnivore diet for the best part of 10 years now, and scurvy takes 6 to 8 weeks to develop, so I should be dead. Saturated fat, exonerated, done, end of discussion. It's not science. It's not even remotely akin to science, and it's actually only underpinned by a criminal cabal of pseudoscientists who are all bought and paid for, and I have shown that many times.
Yeah. Would you go so far to say that cholesterol is good for you? First up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on fiber. A lot of people claim we need it, meant to be good for the gut. You don't believe so. What do you think about fiber, Bart?
No, well, the deal with fiber, as far as we can tell, is that people need to understand that 99.9% of everything that's published about fiber and human health is associative, prospective cohort studies, or even worse, just somebody's educated opinion.
So by that, you mean that it's simply these association studies which show people that consume more fiber tend to have better health outcomes?
Yeah, of that kind. But also that's without controlling any of the covariates, collinearities, and confounders. So this is this is associated with that type study, without any attempt actually to do any science, any experimental science, any interventional science, or control anything, or even observe anything. Actually, what they do is they talk to people and they write down everything that people tell them about their lives and their health, and they believe everything they're told, and that's somehow supposed to be science. Well, that's not science. That's rubbish. When you look at associations, I mean, I can make all sorts of arguments about associations, can't I? Like I could say this, well, there is a strong, linear, predictable, and repeatable relationship between the sales of ice cream at Miami Beach on any given summer's day and the incidence of people reporting sunburn at Miami Beach that day. Ergo, the cause of sunburn is ice cream. No, ridiculous. That's what we've got. There is, however, one sort of clinical study, a sort of pseudo-clinical study with some attempt to control things and some attempt to actually observe things properly. And that one study is smallish scale. I think it's N equals 63 from memory. And what they did is they got these 63 people were all people who already had idiopathic constipation. Idiopathic, by the way, is a medical term for we have no idea what the cause is. The doctors aren't allowed to say we don't know, so they use a word that's people don't understand. They go, oh, thank you, doctor, it's idiopathic. Good. Okay, it just means they don't know. Anyway, they took these people with constipation and stressing and straining and inability to pass stool and hemorrhoids and bleeding anuses and all sorts of stuff that these people had going on. And what they did was they said, well, we're going to split you into 4 groups. I think it was 4. Don't quote me on that. But it was like, okay, you people, you're going to continue to eat exactly the same amount of fiber that you always have done. Don't change a thing. You're our control group. This other group here, what we're going to do is ask you to increase your fiber by 100% or something, whatever it was. And the theory is that this 100% increase in fiber will decrease this constipation problem and the anal bleeding and stress and strain and all of that. And then we're going to have 2 other groups, one that we're going to half the fiber consumption, because that's obviously going to be much worse. And there's another group that's 25% or something like that. I can't remember the exact details. Anyway, the results were there was a dose-response relationship, absolutely, between fiber and all of the symptoms of constipation, stress and strain, anal bleeding, all of that kind of stuff. Here's what the relationship was. The more fiber people ate, the worse the problem was. The less fiber they ate, the more alleviation of those symptoms they got, to the point where the subgroup that ate no fiber at all, none, Every single one of those participants, bar none, had a 100% relief from all signs and symptoms of constipation, stress and strain, anal bleeding, etc. Every single one of them. That's pretty powerful. So we go with that. Basically, what it turns out is that fiber is an irritant in the human colon. Our colons are not evolved for fiber. We do not have a functional cecum, which is where the fermentation of fibers happen in species similar to us, such as gorillas. We don't have that. We have been eating the flesh and fat of animals for roughly 4.5 million years and not fiber. That's why our bodies have changed according to that plan, and gorillas haven't. It causes inflammation. It causes leaky gut syndrome. Or I should say it seems to cause all these things because the association is quite strong, as I spoke about. And these other studies that talk about fiber being good for you, well, that's a thing called healthy user bias. Because people who are generally more healthy, let's face it, generally are better educated. They generally have other healthy habits like exercise and temperance of other habits like smoking, drinking, etc., mostly. And I could go on and on and on. And these are all things that could lead someone to having less inflammation, better bowel function, whatever, despite the fact that they're eating the fiber, not because of the fact that they're eating the fiber. So that's that one in a nutshell.
Wow. Yep. Very well said. The studies that show fiber, have all these positive health outcomes. It's very clear that these positive health outcomes are simply due to the fact that these people are eating vegetables instead of these ultra-processed foods filled with all these chemicals. So I think it's a pretty straightforward one to put to bed. Now, the next nutrient I'd like to talk to you about, which allegedly is missing on a carnivore diet. We've never had a case of scurvy, except James Blunt, supposedly, but I get the feeling he was a bit off the ball there.
Yeah.
How do we get enough fiber on a carnivore diet? I'm sorry, do we get enough vitamin C on a carnivore diet?
Well, the answer is yes. Yes, we do. Why do I say that? Well, because there actually are no established or bona fide cases of scurvy that have ever been reported. An anecdotal story from James Blunt, who's a great singer, but not actually remotely qualified to speak about health, doesn't cut it. It also turns out that apparently during the period of time that James Blunt was talking about, for some reason, his diet consisted entirely of chicken and mayonnaise. Well, there's no surprise he had problems in terms of what it was gum health, actually. It wasn't scurvy. He had gingivitis. Anyway, that's the one story that we've all heard about, scurvy on a... No, we don't get scurvy. Look, I've been on a carnivore diet, or mostly carnivore diet, for the best part of 10 years now. And scurvy takes 6 to 8 weeks to develop. So I should be dead if scurvy was a problem for carnivores, and I'm not. Ergo, either I'm Superman and so is everybody else on the carnivore diet because there's not one single case reported, or they're wrong. Maybe it's that.
Now, there are many accounts of sailors who used to get scurvy. What do you think the reason that they got this was?
Very simple, straightforward. The diet of sailors, the working men on sailing ships, consisted entirely of ship's biscuits. Dried, cakey, almost impossible to chew up, horrific grain-based nonsense, which contained absolutely no vitamin C whatsoever, none. And of course, ergo, 6 to 8 weeks out to sea, scurvy. The officers, the gentlemen, didn't get scurvy. Why not? Well, because their diet consisted of dried meat. Meat contains vitamin C in a very small amount, yes. An amount so small that on the labels, it'll say 0 grams, meaning less than 1 per 100, but not actually meaning 0. There is some vitamin C in meat, even dried meat, even cooked meat, enough to prevent scurvy. In a carnivore, the amount of vitamin C that you need to consume is vastly less than you would need to consume were you eating carbohydrates. Why is that? Well, because one of the main transporters of vitamin C from the blood into the intracellular space is a transporter called GLUT4. You've probably heard of that one. Its main job is to move sugar. Well, we think of it as its main job is to move sugar, and we call it GLUT4 for that reason. But actually, it has several roles, and one of them is vitamin C. Now, if you've got a bunch of carbohydrates trying to get into cells in your blood, that's going to outcompete the vitamin C, which is at a much lower concentration. Ergo, you need more vitamin C to remain healthy. Prevent that blockade by not pouring carbohydrates down your stupid neck every day of your life, unnecessary contraindicated carbohydrates, then your GLUT4 is free to move as much vitamin C as it wants, pretty much, and it does. So you actually need nanograms per deciliter of blood as a carnivore, not milligrams per deciliter of blood, which you will need if you eat a standard diet. So there it is, vitamin C, put to bed. What's next?
Debunked. What's next? Next up, we have cholesterol and saturated fat causing heart disease. This is I think this one can be put to bed pretty quickly by the fact that the first heart attack in the United States wasn't until the year 1912. And then, in the year 1900, there was no heart disease. All of a sudden, we introduced processed foods and these refined oils, and everyone starts getting sick. But no. They want to blame the one food we've always eaten. Can you talk about, some of the mechanisms behind heart disease and what the true cause is?
Yeah. Once again, let me remind viewers that science is an empirical art. It's not really an art. It's an empirical discipline. If you want to assert cause and effect, you must follow the scientific discipline, lest you, A, look a fool, B, confirm your incompetence in science, and C, lead people up the garden path with a false conclusion, leading to 100 years of false dietary advice, which has directly killed billions of people before their time. What happened? A bloke called Ancel Keys, who was a fish physiologist, by the way, that was his first and foremost thing in academia, a cold water fish physiologist. He was clearly having trouble publishing things as a fish physiologist, and we all know that academics need to publish or perish. It's part of the life of it as an academic. And so he came up with this hypothesis that the consumption of saturated fat and cholesterol was the thing causing heart disease. Then what he did is he looked at the relationship between heart disease and the reported intake in various countries of fat and cholesterol, not the actual observed intakes, what people told the researchers they were consuming, by the way, so still not science. And he found this relationship. Well, he found a relationship in 7 countries. It's called the 7 countries study. Guess how many countries Ancel Keys collected data from for this study? 21 or 22. 21 or 22. That's how many. Guess how many of those data points were excluded from the 7 country study? You can do the math on this, Max. I'm sure you can.
I'll get there. I think it's about 14 or 15.
Right. So what he did was he cherry-picked. He picked the countries that agreed with his hypothesis and published that. Anyone that says that's not true does not know the history. This is public record. Everybody that knows the history knows that's what he did. Ancel Keys was a criminal, and he should have spent the remainder of his life incarcerated in prison, not lauded as the greatest scientist of our time, because he was nothing of the sort. The man is directly responsible for vastly more deaths by orders of magnitude than Hitler and Pol Pot put together, because there is no causal relationship between heart disease and the intake of either saturated fat or cholesterol. We have a bunch of prospective cohort studies. The ones that concern saturated fat specifically, there are 5 major meta-analyses available for your reading pleasure in the literature today. All 5 agree that there is no meaningful relationship of any kind. Only one of those studies even reached a statistical significance threshold. And the way that you get statistical significance in these large-scale studies is by having a large sample size, not by having a large change in signal or effect. It's minuscule. It's so small that it means that the actual odds, even if it was causal, which it isn't, of a person, any given person, experiencing heart disease over a 1 100-year lifespan is so close to zero as makes absolutely no practical odds to that human being whatsoever. Saturated fat, exonerated, done, end of discussion. Saturated fat does not cause heart disease, demonstrated. There is a slightly better relationship between cholesterol and various subfractions of the lipoproteins and heart disease in prospective cohort studies. Slightly better. Nonetheless, well, sunburn and ice cream sales. There is no experimental work, nor even any remotely feasible mechanistic cause and effect means by which cholesterol or any of the lipoproteins or any subfraction of the lipoproteins whatsoever could possibly cause heart disease. It's the stupidest, most vapid, most vacuous hypothesis that exists anywhere in science, just about. Its inanity is vast, and it's actually only underpinned by a criminal cabal of pseudoscientists who are all bought and paid for. And I have shown that many, many times on my YouTube channel, which people should go and watch. It's great. Because you are ordered to by His Lordship Ted. He's my co-conspirator on my channel, or one of my co-conspirators. And anyone that disobeys Ted, well, look out. So go and watch my channel and you'll learn more about it. Cool.
So what is the true culprit of this heart disease and heart attacks?
Right. Easy. Atherosclerosis is the underpinning dysfunction behind most heart disease. Atherosclerotic lesioning of the endothelial cells of the vascular tree is caused by several factors. One is chronic hypertension, high blood pressure. Another one is chronic inflammation of the endothelial cell beds. And the third one is physical injury to those cell beds. It's like when people talk about when you learn how to be a firefighter, they say, well, to have a fire, you need three things. You need a fuel source, oxygen, and heat. Remove any one of those and the fire cannot survive. The same is true of atherosclerosis. You need damage to the endothelial cells, inflammation, and high blood pressure. The high blood pressure actually seems to be the most underpinning cause of the other two. The damage, mostly, is caused, not entirely, because, well, glycation damage is another endothelial cell damager, but mostly it seems to be this so-called idiopathic hypertension that people suffer. I can actually deal with that one too today, just for fun.
You go on, why not chuck it in there?
Well, hypertension is not idiopathic. That when they say, oh, this hypertension is idiopathic, no, it isn't. No. What causes hypertension? People say, oh, it's salt. No. Mostly it's the inability to excrete salt that causes hypertension. Sure, the excess salt is causing it, but any healthy, normal person with normally functioning kidneys will excrete excess salt. So if you've got excess salt in your blood causing hypertension, it's not really the salt that's the issue. It's the fact that you can't excrete salt normally. What is the usual cause of an inability to excrete salt? I'll tell you if you don't know. It's hyperinsulinemia. What's the cause of hyperinsulinemia, Max?
Too many carbohydrates.
Pouring unnecessary contraindicated carbohydrates down your stupid neck every day of your life. So if you want to sort out the hypertension issue you've got, if you've got one, stop eating carbs.
I think that's a great way to put it, in the sense that people like to blame, red meat for these issues, but they can't give us a mechanism as to how it works. They can't point to, it's this compound in meat that does this. They go, here are these association studies which have all these other confounding variables.
You say that, Max, but they've actually tried. There's two that they've mentioned in the literature that they are still banging on about as being absolutely the cause of heart disease from red meat. And they are called NEU5GC and TMAO. Okay, so let's deal with TMAO first. TMAO is trimethylamine oxide. It is a metabolic byproduct of TMA, trimethylamine, and trimethylamine comes from meat and eggs, mostly. So there you go, slam dunk, heart disease. What am I talking about? Okay, well, and the studies to prove it, here's what they do. They take people and they overnight change their diet from a standard diet that they're on to a diet that's consisting of a high amount of meat. And then over the next few weeks, they measure the level of TMA and TMAO that builds up in their body and say, there you go, there's proof. Well, here's what they failed to consider. After several months on a carnivore diet, your microbiome readjusts and you cultivate a whole bunch of bacteria whose sole source of energy and, the way they live with us in our guts is that they gobble up TMAO. Idiots. It's absolutely stunning that they call this science. So TMAO, not a problem. Doesn't happen, not a cause of any kind of concern whatsoever. The idea about NEU5GC is that, NEU5GC is like a flag. It's like a tag that is found on the red meat, basically. And it's a foreign tag, so-called, that the body recognizes somehow and causes an inflammatory response to, and somehow that causes cancer or something. Okay, fine, great theory. Until we then look at the prospective cohort studies where they look at the amount of red meat being consumed by people, and they then look at the incidence of heart disease, and they get once again this ridiculously weak, almost non-existent, near zero signal, which is statistically significant because of millions of person years of follow-up, but equates, even if it was cause and effect, which it isn't, to the odds of any given living human being over a 100-year lifespan of getting cancer or anything else is so close to zero as makes no practical odds whatsoever. Pass the stake. All right?
All right. Now, obviously cholesterol is very essential. It's a precursor to testosterone. We need it for our cell membranes. Would you go so far to say, and our body also makes some too, which I think a lot of people don't know. Yeah. Would you go so far to say that cholesterol is good for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's be very accurate here. Without sufficient cholesterol, you will die very quickly. 50% by weight and by volume of every single cell membrane and every single one of the trillions and trillions with a T of cells in your body is cholesterol. Testosterone is based from cholesterol, so is estrogen. The myelin sheathing on all of your nervous cells throughout your body, guess where that comes from? Yep, cholesterol again. Etc., etc., etc. I could go on all day. Vitamin D, which is a precursor to every other enzyme reaction in your body. Well, that's in the cholesterol pathway as well. Your body creates this stuff because it needs to. It's under the control of your genes, and your genes are the absolute pinnacle of human evolution in your line of ancestry. Right now, you are the peak of evolution. Your genes have survived at least 3,800 million years, and I think a lot longer than that, actually. They really know what they're doing. So yes, cholesterol, vital. And under control of your body. Let's just get out of the way and let our body do what it needs to, shall we? And you said that the body makes some cholesterol. I'll give you a number. It's 80% of the cholesterol in your body at any given time is made by your body from non-cholesterol precursors. You don't need to eat cholesterol to have it. So there it is, cholesterol. Good stuff. Get it down here.
Brilliant. Now, the next one is kidney issues from excess protein. A lot of people think if they eat too much meat, they're going to start running into some kidney problems.
Right.
Is this the case?
That is not the case, no. It's another fantasy. It's another piece of theological nonsense. A person who has existing kidney disease for whatever reason, and I can tell you the reason is not the eating of protein that will cause kidney disease, but if you have existing kidney disease, then the advice for you to limit your protein intake is indicated in your case. Absolutely. Because dysfunctional kidneys can't handle as much protein as healthy kidneys. Healthy kidneys can handle any load of protein you like. It will not cause disease. There is no evidence it will cause disease, is what I should say in that respect. In that regard, there is not one single piece of experimental work on human beings that can refute what I've just said. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I think an easy way to look at this again is how many people have done the carnivore diet now, and how many people have kidney issues from the carnivore diet.
Well, the answers to those two questions is millions and millions and millions, and none that I'm aware of.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same as scurvy. Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It's a theology. It's fear-mongering. Oh, you don't want to do that carnivore diet because you'll get scurvy, you won't be able to shit, you'll get bum cancer and kidney disease. None of those things are true.
It'll be great when we have the actual scientific studies, showing this.
Well, we're never going to, Max. It's never going to happen. Right. It cannot happen. The thing with experimenting, properly controlled, properly observed experimental studies on human beings over decades is that you can't get them past ethics committees. Nobody can afford to do such a study. And who the hell wants to give up their whole life to be a subject in such a study? That's why these arguments, these discussions, these theological discussions continue to this day. See, the thing is, if we had the science or the capacity to do the science, it would have been done. And would have the answer, and there'd be nothing to talk about anymore, which would be really upsetting for me because that would leave me out of a job. Because my job is re-educating people about what science really is and what it isn't. And there's this ring-fenced area of ideology called human nutrition science. How do I know? Because I was a professor of health science that taught that very subject for a number of years. So I know exactly how poor the science is in that field. And I'll tell you, it's not science. It's not even remotely akin to science. It's nonsense. It's theology. And unfortunately, it's all bought and paid for. Because the thing is, science costs a lot of money to do. Universities don't pay scientists to do studies. They pay them a salary to teach students. They expect them to do science as part of their workload, but they also expect academics to fund that science themselves from external sources. So who's got money for science? Well, industry. The food industry. 98% of all scientists agree with whoever their funding source is.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. If you believe that human nutrition science remotely exists, you have been fooled. My job is to re-educate you.
And I think what a lot of people don't know about these studies that get done is that if they find, if they have negative findings towards what they're trying to push, they're under no legal obligation to even publish that study. That's where you see all these
the filing cabinet.
Bye. So you see all these people talking about, these certain substances that are super well researched, and there's not a single study showing it's bad. It's like, who's going to go out of their way to do a study on some random artificial sweetener? Well, it's the food companies. They get rid of all the bad ones, publish the good ones, and all of a sudden it's this safe and effective. I know you love those words there.
I'm safe and effective. I'm the science, by the way, for those of you that don't know. Safe and effective. Don't question the science, even though that is exactly how you do science. Trust me.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Now, the next one that a lot of people like to say is they like to think that the carnivore diet isn't for them. Every other animal, they all eat the same thing. But apparently for humans, our proper human diet isn't for everyone. Can we put this one to bed?
Yes. Rubbish. Yes, it is. The carnivore diet is ideal for you too. How do I know that? Because your genes are 99.9 something % similar to mine. We are both members of the species Homo sapiens sapiens. We both evolved in the same pathway, ostensibly, over a period of, at least 4.5 million years, it seems, since our primate ancestors came down from the trees, stood upright and said, look at those yummy, yummy mammals. Let's go and eat those. Mostly because it was getting cold, the trees were dying, and there was no fruit or something at the time. Whatever. Anyway, whatever the reason was, the stable isotope testing of long bones of human beings and their predecessors discovered all over the world all tell the same story, and that is that any remains found on any human remains over about 11,000 to 12,000 years old all come back the same on the isotopes. They all say this individual ate meat and fat and no plants to speak of. So anything that any species of animal does for millions of years tends to have an effect on the body structures, the organ systems, and the genetic makeup of that species. It's called positive selection pressure. So evolution is a fact. Whether you like it or not, it still is a fact. How do I know? Well, here we go. People that say, oh, evolution is just a theory, my word. Are you people also of the belief that the earth is flat? Because evolution is a fact. Here's the logic behind that. Okay. Max, you're a young man. I presume you don't have any children yet?
No children yet, but...
Okay, when you do, if you do, I'm not suggesting that you must. It's not a fait accompli, but let's say you have some children at some point. Will their genes be an exact copy of yours?
No.
There'll be a mixture between yours and their mother's.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's evolution, isn't it?
True.
Sorry. Whether you like evolution or not, there it is. When those children have children, they'll get a mixture of genes too. And the genes that are best conduced to survive will. And the genes that are worst conduced to survive will not.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people like to think that, because they're from some part of the world, that they're supposedly equipped to break down plants. But it's like, well, okay, as you mentioned earlier, we don't have the coecombs to ferment these plants. And most of the plants that they ate, they weren't even around until pretty recently. Only 12,000 years ago, we started agriculture. All these modern vegetables and fruits that we eat, they're not even real plants, man-made plants.
That's right.
So it's, how are you breaking down the defense compounds in these plants? I'd love to know with these people.
Well, most people are not.
Exactly. That's why everyone's dying. Now, the next one, high fat.
Yeah.
People hear this. You're going on a high-fat carnivore diet. They get a bit scared because fat sounds a lot like the fat on our body. Mm-hmm. I don't believe this to be the case, but everyone I know that's been on the carnivore diet has lost a lot of weight.
Yep.
Can you break down how eating fat does not make you fat?
Well, at the end of the day, one's body mass is a function of the amount of mass that they consume and the amount of mass that they excrete in some way. Some people refer to that as calories in, calories out. Don't even get me started on that. Another piece of anti-scientific nonsense. No, it isn't. It's nothing to do with calories whatsoever. Mass in, mass out will affect your net balance of mass. Absolutely. However, your body composition, the makeup of your mass, can be affected by multiple factors. Hormones, your endocrine system, your inflammasome, the makeup of the mass that you take in, the makeup of the mass that you're excreting as a function of your metabolism, all sorts of things. At the end of the day, a human being requires the intake of a certain amount of mass of reactive food substance, which comes largely in, 4 gross forms. And they are fats, proteins, carbohydrates, which are unnecessary because you can make all the carbohydrate you need yourself, and alcohol, which is also completely unnecessary and also similarly contraindicated due to its toxic effects. So really, there are 2 sources of food intake that a human being requires, and all the required nutrients that a human being requires are in those 2, and they are proteins and fats. Proteins are used for energy only when there is insufficient intake of fat, because fat is the preferred fuel source. How do I know that? Well, use your brain, people. If I take a human body and I dehydrate the thing, 65% of what's left by weight is protein. Even on, someone that's got some fat on them. It ranges a bit, of course, because of the level of fat, but the concept holds. Your body prefers to use fat. The way to encourage your body to gain more fat than is the genetic set point, an unhealthy level of fat, is to mess up your inflammasome, to mess up your endocrine system, your hormone system, by feeding it unnecessary, contraindicated, toxic carbohydrates and alcohol. Simple as that. Stop doing those things, and your body mass and body composition will normalize over time according to its own program of healing from the damage that you've already done. And also depending on how long it took you to, because people always say to me when I'm consulting with them, oh, how long will it take for this to come right? How long will my health take to recover? And I usually say, well, how long did it take you to mess it up? Pretty quickly, much more quickly often than it took you to mess it up, but it's going to take some time. So if you do enough of the right thing long enough, you'll get the results. And in fact, it's not just diet. There are 5 things that a person needs to do, I think. 5 health hacks that you need to know about. Funnily enough, there's a video on my Fine YouTube channel called 5 Health Hacks You Need to Know About. You should watch it, all of you. And you should do all 5 every day. Because otherwise, you know what happens, don't you? Ted will visit your place late at night and he will bring his bucket of soapy frogs and his wetsuit with the bottom cut out. You don't want that. Trust me.
So essentially, the 2 main drivers of obesity is this metabolic slowdown, which comes as a result of the processed foods and all the other garbage that people put in their body. Their cells become damaged, and therefore the mitochondria, which is what produces the energy, obviously, that slows down, produce less energy. The amount of energy you're burning per day slows down. Yes. And then as well as the fact that, appetite regulation is also a big problem. Can you tell us about how it's actually carbohydrates that are what mess up our appetites? And essentially fat makes us full, so we don't overeat, and therefore we stay lean. But it's the carbohydrates which make us super hungry.
Okay. So the metabolic reaction to putting a lot of carbohydrate suddenly into your bloodstream, i.e. every time you eat any amount of food that contains any significant amount of carbohydrate whatsoever, your body reacts to that immediately and strongly. Why? Because that carbohydrate in your system above the normal set point for carbohydrate is toxic. Your body needs to get rid of it as quickly as possible. So what it does is it releases this huge bolus of insulin, which is designed to drive glucose into the cells out of the bloodstream. And that's what happens. And often there's an overshoot of the insulin, which then drags the blood sugar down lower than it was before you had the carbohydrates. So several hours later, if it even takes that long, you're hungry again and you want more food, you think. Oh, I better have some more carbs then. Morning tea, time for muffins. No. Get up in the morning and have a decent meal of fat and protein. Steak and eggs is what you should have at breakfast. There's also a great song about that, which is also the national anthem of the independent sovereign nation of Pimbatia, where I live, in a former part of former New Zealand, which we have seceded from. We have claimed this territory. It's now Pimbatia, and we have a song about that. And if you want to hear that song, all you need to do is watch on a Sunday morning New Zealand and Australia time, quite early in Australia, apologies for that, or Saturday afternoon in the rest of the sensible world, excluding Canada, because that's not a sensible part of the world mostly. I'm just kidding. And at the end of that show, there will always be a singing of the national anthem, even though Her Majesty Pim, Queen of Pirates, and also Queen of Pimbatia, doesn't like such. We just do it to piss her off, frankly.
Brilliant. Now we got one.
Actually, the point, Max, was this: if you eat steak and eggs in the morning, or something similar to that, you're not going to be hungry again that day. Yeah. And you can repeat that the next morning, and you'll eat once a day, actually, which is a great way of maintaining an ideal body composition. Or you could do it later in the day. It doesn't have to be in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly something I experienced. I used to be hungry 24/7, and then within a few days on carnivore, I was like, what the heck? I'm not thinking about food all day. What's going on here? So that is a wonderful revelation when starting carnivore. Now we got one final one, and that is that our brain needs a certain amount of glucose. Now, a lot of people seem to be unfamiliar with what gluconeogenesis is. And so they hear, well, our brain needs glucose. We're not eating substantial amounts of glucose on a carnivore diet. We can't function properly. Can you give us the rundown on that?
Well, there's a simple cross-check on that. Listen to videos produced by carnivores to show that they really are functioning on a cerebral level really quite well, most of them. and listen to some vegans, see if they're doing the same. No, they are not, patently. Yes, gluconeogenesis, you say. Gluconeogenesis is the process by which the human body manufactures all the glucose that it requires itself from non-glucose precursors, i.e., the glycerol backbones of free fatty acids, one or two of the amino acids, and monocarboxylates such as lactate, for example. Your body has the genes to encode for all the enzymes required, for all the reactions required to make sugar, make glucose itself. The exact dietary requirement for glucose in human beings is not 1 single gram ever. Yes, your brain needs glucose. And yes, if your blood glucose drops below the level your brain requires, you're in trouble. That doesn't mean you need to eat any. You don't need to eat glucose to have it. Simple as that.
And just for all the athletes out there, the glycogen in your muscles, that can be replenished from the exact same thing. So
yes,
no need to eat carbohydrates being an athlete.
No, athletes do not need carbohydrates any more than the standard population. Well, I say that with the caveat that an athlete who is a carb-addicted athlete, a carb-dependent athlete, is going to need some carbs, otherwise they're going to bonk. They're going to suffer. Their performance is going to drop. It's going to be no good. A properly fat-adapted athlete, which, by the way, can take 6 months, by the way, to properly readapt to your species-appropriate, species-specific diet, a properly fat-adapted athlete not only keeps pace with a carb athlete, but they will usually kick their ass in any sport. How do I know? Well, because as an exercise physiologist, among other things, I have worked with a large number of professional athletes and those in the military organizations at the elite level as well, who require a high level of physical performance for their very lives. And I can tell you that properly fat-adapted athletes and military personnel do outperform the carb ones any day of the week and twice on Sundays.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would be amazed at how many of their favorite athletes are actually fat-adapted athletes, but they just don't talk about it due to sponsors.
Well, it's not just sponsors. It's also this. If you're competing with a bunch of other people and you're winning, you're not going to give up what your secret is, are you?
True. Very true.
Of course you're not. Because you want to maintain that advantage. So you're going to keep stum about it. Makes perfect sense. I have currently 3 or 4, depending on what level is elite and or professional athletes still on my books, even though I don't really consult that much anymore. They're all fat adapted and they're all at the top of their game internationally.
I even heard Mohamed Salah, the footballer in the English Premier League for Liverpool. He's on he's fat adapted. LeBron James, I'm not sure if he still was. He was for a while. It's very fascinating. Now, the one last thing regarding glucose, which quite possibly is my favorite vegan argument of them all, is that allegedly it is our preferred fuel source because we burn glucose before we burn fat. Now, this is rather exciting for a lot of alcoholics out there because we burn alcohol before those two. So can you put this one to bed?
Absolutely. The reason for the ordering of the oxidation of these substrates to get them out of the body is because of their level of toxicity. Sugar is toxic, whereas fat is not, so we need to get rid of that first. And alcohol is even more toxic again than sugar, so we need to get rid of that first too. It's one of the most ridiculous things I've heard. But then almost everything that comes out of a vegan mouth is ridiculous. There's nothing that they have to say that has any validity in science or in basic common sense. These people are divorced from objective reality. They are imbeciles. And frankly, the Dunning-Kruger just drips from every pore. That's my job, of course, though, is to come online and to make that clear to people. But offline, I'm actually a perfectly pleasant, personable individual. As you know yourself, Max, because we actually met a couple of weekends ago, didn't we? That was great.
We did. It was great. It was great. Even nicer off camera than you are on camera, Bart, I got to say. So everyone out there who's wondering what Bart's like, he's even nicer.
Yeah. People often ask my partner, Pim, geez, what is it like living with him? And she said, well, if I had to live with that bloke, I wouldn't. I'd leave. Off camera, he's not that bloke. That's a character. Okay. Wakey, wakey, smell a bakey. Okay. There you go.
Awesome.
A pleasure as always, Max.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Anytime you like.